Chapter 6 My First Scout. General Wool had been ordered to march to the important city of Chihuahua by a route marked with red ink on a map sent him by the sapient head of the War Department, Marcy. Unfortunately for the success of this wise scheme to capture a place once taken by 7 Apaches, there lay in the way of the proposed route several high ranges of mountains that a goat could not climb, and that it would take weeks to flank, through deserts without water. General Wool decided to communicate with his superior, General Taylor, and Lieutenant Carleton. Company A, 1st Dragoons, with 6 men, was detailed to carry the dispatches to the hero of the Battle of Palo Alto and Reseca de la Palma. Thanks to my excellent horse and the favoritism of our worthy First Sergeant Charles Hardy, I was detailed on this, to me, pleasant duty. With 4 days' rations of coffee and sugar in our haversacks, for the rest we were expected to live on the country, we left at dark to pass through 200 miles of enemy territory, and this without a guide. Taking a mule trail, we pushed rapidly forward most of the night. Carleton was an old prairie tramper, and kept our course well by the stars. At early dawn, seeing the white walls of a rancho a short distance from the road, we made for it, and were inside the gate, or zaguan, before the sleepy greasers made their appearance. They were rather astonished and somewhat alarmed at their early visitors, and the size of our horses filled them with amazement and admiration. One of our men was stationed on the azotea, or roof of the chapel, and no one was allowed to leave the place. The horses were unsaddled and well rubbed down, watered and fed with barley obtained in the place. The men in the rancho were an ill-looking set of cutthroats, and gave us glances of hatred, but the women, the young ones especially, were kind and gave us some excellent cooked beans, frijoles. An old man gave the lieutenant to understand that a large body of soldiers had passed to the eastward the day before. This was good news for us, as they were dressed in American uniforms. We saddled up, and taking a supply of barley in our forage bags and some jerked beef for our own use, we were off again at sunrise. This day and the next passed without any incident of note. The following day, our route lay through a low-level country different in every respect from any I had ever seen before. Cactus in 100 varieties, with the white-leaved wild olive, covered the ground in all directions. Away off to our right, sharp blue peaked mountains rose grandly in the clean air. I enjoyed this march exceedingly. I had fully recovered from my severe injuries and sickness. I felt no fatigue, and my appetite was truly wonderful. The road was broad and good, with the chaparral rising on both sides like a wall. In the forenoon we reached a hacienda belonging, it was said, to General Mariano Arista, and done ample justice to the good fare found there. We had not left the hacienda 2 miles behind, when the report of a carbine from our advance guard of one man caused us to draw saber. He made his appearance coming back at speed, and close on his rear came a crowd of fierce guerrillas, yelling like devils. I must confess that my first thought was to turn and run for it, but the quick command of Carleton to charge and give them your sabers caused me to go in with the rest, though my heart was up in my throat choking me. I parried a lance thrust. A black savage face was before me for an instant. My horse crushed another underfoot, then another, and I came out of the dust surprised to find myself alive and unhurt. Carleton and my companions were all safe. Not a man or horse touched. Our entire loss was confined to a few forage sacks and 1 carbine. This was my maiden charge, and I believe I acquitted myself with credit. True, there was no blood on my saber, but there was plenty on my spurs. My good steed, Soldan, had done all the fighting and had done it well. Our road led us into the dry bed of an arroyo flanked on each side by huge boulders. We were passing a clump of dead cottonwood trees when the lieutenant, who was in advance, held up his hand in warning. Right in our path, not 100 yards distant, was a lancer stationed with his back to us. He was so intently watching a cloud of dust rising toward the distant mountains that he was unaware of our presence. Carleton drove his spurs into his horse, and followed by the rest, was on him before he could run. Our prisoner was a guerrillard, clothed entirely in leather, well mounted on a small but wiry mustang. He was armed with a lance, a lazo, 2 huge pistols, a short gun, and a sword. He was badly frightened and gave us to understand that it was the army of Los Barbarians del Norte that raised the dust and that they were then only 12 miles off. Tying him on his horse by his own lazo, we moved on, and in about 2 hours, emerging from the trail into a broad road, we encountered our rear guard at a place called Ramos on the Camargo and Monterey Road. 2 days later, we were at General Taylor's main camp outside of Monterey. In a most beautiful grove of live oak and pecan trees, the woods of San Domingo called by our army Walnut Springs. This was a most delightful place to encamp an army. Huge shade trees covered many acres of good hard sod, while springs of the coldest water gushed out of the ground and run in crystal streams through the grove, affording an abundant supply of excellent water for man and beast. Here we heard confirmed the terms of the capitulation which was granted by General Taylor to the beaten Mexicans after the capture of Monterey in September. What a disgrace to American arms! Everything most advantageous to the Mexicans and injurious to the United States. The Mexican infantry were allowed to retain their arms, the cavalry, their horses, the artillery, one field battery of 6 guns with 21 rounds to a gun. The U.S. troops were not to advance beyond the Reconada Pass, and there should be armistice for 8 weeks. When in another hour's fighting, we could have had them all unconditional prisoners and used nothing but our steel. Old Rough and Ready committed a great blunder, with no justifiable excuse. Ben McCullough's Texas Rangers were still loud in their expressions of indignation. Threats were made against General Taylor, and the old hero deemed it necessary to double the Dragoon Guard around his headquarters. Editor's note. Here, the sequence of events in Chamberlain's journal becomes confused. In the interests of clarity, the publishers have accordingly omitted several pages. Apparently, the young Sam spent about 2 weeks with General Taylor's army at Walnut Springs, during which time he visited Monterey and made numerous sketches depicting the recent fighting for the city. He also, it appears, did his share of roistering for the rejoined General Wool's army, probably early in November, lashed to his saddle, suffering from a severe head wound and a bad case of what he called mania a potu. General Wool had by this time advanced as far as the Mexican town of Monclova, some 200 miles south of the Rio Grande, and was there awaiting expiration of the armistice. Footnotes. Captain Benjamin McCullough, Indian fighter, surveyor, Texas Ranger, fought in the Texas War for Independence at the Battle of San Jacinto. At the outbreak of the Mexican War, he organized a company of mounted men, performed daringly at the battles of Monterey and Buena Vista, and emerged from the war a major. In February 1861, as a colonel, he commanded the Texas troops that received the surrender of General Twiggs at San Antonio. Later, commissioned a brigadier general in the Confederate Army, he was killed at the beginning of the Battle of Elkhorn Tavern when reconnoitering the Union lines. Second footnote. Most historians do not agree with Chamberlain's judgment, though many people did at the time. The terms of the armistice, which Colonel Jefferson Davis had a large share in drawing up, brought to an end a savage but inconclusive 4-day battle which had left the Mexicans still occupying their citadel in the heart of the city. The truce arrangements, specifying their withdrawal, gave the American army complete possession of Monterey and badly needed time to build up its strength.